Hello. Hello again. Absolutely. Hi, guys. God bless you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you just saw that previous post that we just put out there now, because I'm telling you, that's just absolutely crazy, isn't it? We've been saying for quite some time that old Trumpy boy was controlled opposition, and look what he just went and did. 70 billion to Pfizer. Are you kidding me? Pfizer alone responsible for murdering 470,000 Americans. And that's just the Americans, let alone everybody else that's been dropping dead because of his death jab. This really is a way to bring about justice, isn't it? And, sort of like be a good steward of those that were sort of like duped into taking this guy's stuff. Do you know what I mean? Mr. Unapologetic Albert Baller. Yeah, that guy. You're rewarding him with a contract literally like that. It's inconceivable, guys. Initially, I was tempted just for about 10 seconds. And I'm telling you, for about 10 seconds, I think, do we even bother with the live that's been prepared for today? But actually, I'm a bit like, no, we've had a conversation about that. We know what it's all about, Mr. Stargate, Mr. Warp Speed, Mr. I'm the father of the vaccine. Do you know what I mean? Giving off, billions also for his mRNA sort of like factories. Same thing going over here with the UK with AstraZeneca, with the 1.5 billion sort of like, grant that's being given to these pharmaceutical companies. And it's just like, really? You don't ever go here and none of these guys turn around and saying, oh yeah, we're going to be putting billions and billions into cancer research or into, sort of AIDS or whatever, the consequences of our death jabs. We're not going to start dealing with this particular presenting problem or condition or ailment or, sort of like disability or whatever, or make life for those that are less abled, so much more better than it always is. No, we want to kill you all, sterilize you all with poisonous vaccinations. Unbelievable. So today, I'm going to sidestep that today because I'm just not in the mood for it. I put out the post. That's what we did, Lord. Today, we're going to be looking at something just as equally damaging when it comes to an article, again, coming out from Too Cool for School, ukreloaded.com. Tempted to do this one this morning, but no, we did the Digital ID, Agenda 2030, and the Mark of the Beast. Hoping as well, guys, that you've also seen our sort of like new read all about it sort of like morning post, where there's 30 to 40 articles there for your attention, and then front paper headlines in the 10 sort of like picture screenshots there. So by the time you get up and about on your day, you have a really good idea of what's going on across the world, as well as our live that we do, and then the follow-up post which supports that as well. So here we are again. Thank you, guys, and God bless you, our Cher and our Sherry and the rest of you for stopping on in, for being so supportive of us as a ministry, as a team. Thank you for your prayers and your support as well, guys. It's not gone unnoticed. It is by the grace of God that we are still here, that we haven't received strikes, been shut down, taken down, or been having to resort to the unending sort of like backup channels that we've got. So God is in control. God is doing something here. Thank you, guys, for just being a part of us and our channel family. And so, as per usual, we do now our 2 lives a day, 6 days a week, just to sort of like throw everything at it, I mean, hammer and tong. If we've got more time, then Lord, help us to use it to glorify you, to praise you, to lift you high, and just to express our love for you. What a great privilege it is for us to sort of like serve you guys. So thank you for allowing us to do that. So let's say a quick hello before we get into today's afternoon sort of like live, which is the Psychology of Tyranny. Really nice. If you're wanting to sort of like fall asleep to this, you can. Hi Sherry, God bless you. Thank you again for being here as well. Give a shout out there now to our sort of like moderators. They're just so awesome. Their work ethic matches my own, and they're doing this sort of like twice a day now as well. And so bless you guys for that. Hi Alison. This is why you need more of this, just gotta have it. Hi there, Diane. Hi, good to see you. G'day. Hope you're having a good one. Are you guys all checking in, showing each other some love? That's just awesome. Ladies in the house. Excellent. Okay, let's just get on to this then. No messing. All right. The Psychology of Tyranny, how governments undermine consent, and legitimacy through psychological manipulation. Psychological manipulation refers to the use of tactics that influence, control, or shape individuals' thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, often without their full awareness or even their consent, by exploiting core human vulnerabilities such as the need for survival, the need for security, belonging, and self-esteem, as outlined in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Manipulators craft narratives, evoke emotions, and apply pressure to steer people towards the desired outcomes. This form of manipulation permeates all facets of human interaction, frequently operating beneath conscious awareness. From consumer-seller dynamics leveraging scarcity to employer-employee relationships using carrot and stick incentives, and even intimate partnership employing guilt or emotional priming. These tactics exploit universal psychological susceptibilities. Individuals often engage in such behaviors unconsciously, mirroring the strategies used by larger entities. Government, entrusted to serve citizens through mutual consent, also deploy psychological manipulation to enforce compliance, suppress dissent, and justify contentious policies. The consequences of such manipulation are far more profound than those arising in personal or commercial relationships. Why? Because when government distorts perception, it erodes informed consent, breaches the social contracts, undermines democratic legitimacy, and conceals authoritarian tendencies. The purpose of this article and our live today, really, guys, is to dissect 12 core manipulation tactics that have been identified, explore their alignment with Maslow's need, examining 62 framing words and phrases prevalent in media, and offer detection strategies and expose how government's unethical use of these methods, alongside their everyday presence in personal and professional spheres, threatens autonomy and threatens our freedom. And you might just thinking, dude, why are you going there with this? Because what does the Lord Jesus say to us when it came down to the end times? Do not be deceived. Pray tell that this sort of like opens some eyes. So, looking at the state's use of psychological manipulation. All governments have a long history of using psychological manipulation to influence public behavior and maintain control. Below here, we're going to discuss now our concrete examples grounded in documented cases with a focus on brevity and on clarity. Number one, the propaganda campaigns of Nazi Germany between the 1930s and the 1940s. The Nazi regime used state-controlled media, films like Triumph of the Will, and posters to glorify Hitler and dehumanize Jews and other minority groups, fostering nationalistic fervor and scapegoating minorities. This shaped public perception and justified aggressive policies. Just think about how they name and shame us in the sense of being conspiracy theorists or anti-vaxxers. Number two, the fear-based messaging on the US war on terror post 9/11. The US government used color-coded terror alerts and imagery of the 9/11 attacks to maintain public fear, justifying policies like the Patriot Act and military interventions. This created a climate of compliance through perceived constant threats. Number 3, the nudge tactics coming from the UK COVID-19 2020. The UK's behavioural insights team used nudge techniques like emphasising social conformity. Most people are complying, and the fear of missing out, to encourage compliance with lockdowns and vaccination campaigns. Leaked documents later revealed deliberate use of fear to drive adherence. Number 4, disinformation and censorship. As for the Soviet Union and the Cold War, the USSR's KGB spread false narratives through state media, like claiming the US created AIDS, while censoring dissenting voices to control the narrative and suppress opposition. Number 5, the social credit system, China, that's now still ongoing. China's social credit system, if we are to believe what Western press tell us about the same, manipulates behavior by rewarding compliance. For example, good scores for following the rules, and punishing dissent, for example, travel bans and job loss. This creates self-censorship and conformity through constant monitoring. Do note that psychological manipulation by government isn't always fear-based. The carrot approach, using incentives and positive reinforcements, is also common. Here are examples for clarity. The carrot-based incentive approach. Nudge campaigns, as we see over here in the UK from the 2010s to now. The UK's behavioural insights team used positive reinforcements like tax breaks for energy efficient behaviours to encourage desired actions without overt coercion. The US World War II bond drive in the 40s, the government used patriotic messaging and celebrity endorsements to encourage citizens to buy war bonds, framing it as a rewarding act of national pride rather than a duty. The carrot approach often works by appealing to social approval, financial gain, or personal benefits, making compliance feel voluntary. However, governments blend both fear and incentives depending on the goal: fear for rapid control, carrots for sustained cooperation. Having said this, fear is a key motivator across most psychological operations, as it creates discomfort that makes people receptive to government-offered solutions. However, the incentive approach method, as noted before, leverage desires for inclusion and rewards while tapping into a group's identity. It is therefore the interplay of fear with these other motivators that makes people malleable as solution to address both the discomfort of fear and the appeal of positive outcomes. This nuanced combination explains why these tactics are so effective. So let's just look at some of the core psychological manipulation tactics. This is what they do with the mainstream media. This is what they do with the silencing of dissent and the information wars. This is the sort of meat on the bones as such when it comes to what they're literally using and weaponizing against you and your mental health and your will, the coercion. You listen to some of the real key words and terms around this, guys, because this is what they're doing to us. Here we go, is a comprehensive analysis of 12 core areas of psychological manipulation that have been identified as being used by the governments. Each section defines the concept, then it explains its psychological mechanism and provides concrete examples of how government has employed these tactics, including the types of manipulation one might observe. The analysis is detailed yet concise, drawing on historical and contemporary cases, and avoids speculative or unverified claims. Are you ready? Number 1, gaslighting. Definition and mechanism. Gaslighting involves manipulating individuals or groups into doubting their own perceptions, memories, or reality, often by denying facts or reframing events. Governments use gaslighting to sow confusion, undermine dissent, and maintain control by making people question their understanding of events. It exploits the human need for certainty and trust in authority, creating dependency on official narratives. So, how does it work? Well, it denies or distorts verifiable truths to create doubt. There's your fact-checking lock. You know what I mean? The fact-checking and all of the other banners and everything else that's been put up. It also uses repetition and authority to reinforce false narratives. It also often pairs with censorship to limit access to contradictory information, which is why it's really hard and difficult with some of the articles and the resources that are there. It takes a while to gather these. You don't go from, the mainstream media trough. You have to look elsewhere. Examples and types of manipulation. State disinformation campaigns. Think in the Cold War of the 40s and 80s. The state denied or reframed events, often blaming innocent parties to confuse citizens and international observers, making them question the evidence. This manifested in state media repeating false narratives, while at the same time labeling dissenters as delusional or traitors, eroding trust in alternative accounts. This is what's being weaponized against you guys. Then the denial of surveillance programs. Before Edward Snowden's leak, God bless that man, US officials denied widespread NSA surveillance, framing critics as paranoid. This made citizens question their concern about privacy violations as repeated public dismissals by officials. For example, no, we don't spy on Americans, they said, by contrasting with later revelations sowing distrust in personal judgments. Common manipulations to watch for: official denials of documents, events, or evidence, labeling critics as conspiracy theorists or unstable, voila, contradictory messaging that creates cognitive dissonance, suppression of alternative information sources. This is what we're having, guys. This is why we've got to speak out the truth, no matter the cost. Because all of this is geared around the father of lies and him sowing that into minds and hearts. Number 2, the bandwagon effect. Definition and mechanism. The bandwagon effect encourages people to adopt behaviors or beliefs because everyone else is doing it. Governments exploit this by creating the perception of widespread support for a policy or ideology, leveraging social conformity and the human desire to align with the majority. 9 out of 10 Brits don't want the Palestine, sort of like state. Look what they let them do, and they'll turn around and start saying, no, everybody wants this, and people want to be popular, don't they? They want to follow the crowd. They want to bleat as the sheeple that they are. It's similar to FOMO, but focuses on conformity rather than the fear of exclusion. So how does it work? It amplifies the appearance of majority support through media or public displays, but it downplays or silences opposition to create a sense of inevitability. Oh, so if you mention anything about this, that, and the other. It also appeals to the desire to belong to the dominant group. No. We don't do that at all over here with our channel, guys. We lone wolf it. We trailblaze it. We ain't asking no one's permission to do what it is that we do. So, examples and types of this manipulation. Well, the Nazi Germany mass rallies in the 30s. The Nazi regime staged massive rallies, for example, the Nuremberg rallies, to showcase overwhelming public support, pressurizing individuals to conform to Nazi ideology to avoid standing out. Films and posters depicted huge crowds cheering for Hitler, implying dissent was rare or even abnormal. And you think this is really weird? 5.65 billion people on this planet took the COVID jab. So there's a lot of people out there that say one thing and do another. They're two-faced and they're hypocrites. They really are. Because they don't want to be sort of like, you know, missing out on their holidays. They don't want to have a little bit of discomfort in their lives. No. And they don't want to be sort of like that guy. This is why we're doing this live, guys, is calling people out. No wonder there's only 11 people here. They probably took one look at this and thought, no. I don't want to be educated. I'd rather be sort of like programmed and wired by the narrative than have thoughts and feelings of my own and not actually see that these are the tactics that the beast system is literally using against people. Number two, the UK's behavioural nudging again when it comes to COVID-19 2020. The UK's behavioural insight team used messaging like most people are following lockdown rules to encourage compliance, creating the impression that non-compliance was a minority stance. Which is why when I was living in another county, I was the only one driving down the motorway, as no one was on the road that I was on the motorway, and no one was on the other side either. And I did that through 2 counties worth. And I ain't stopping for nothing. I'm telling you right now. And they must have known. I said, damn, man, look at him. No respect for our rules and our regulations. Absolutely flipping not. Because when there was that emergency, I wanted my children to know that no matter what happens, daddy can get here. Doesn't matter if I have to cross rivers or oceans or whatnot. It ain't stopping me from getting to you and having my time with you. Remember that. So that you're ever in need and you ever need me, I will be there. That's what that told them. Not like, oh no, can't see you. Sorry, my bad. No. Here you go. Ads also highlighted statistics. For example, 90% of people wear masks. Nonsense. To pressure individuals into conforming. Number 3, North Korea's state propaganda, which is still ongoing now. The government portrays universal devotion to the regime through choreographed public events and media, making dissent seem even unthinkable. Often there are broadcasts of synchronized crowds praising the leader with no visible opposition, creating a sense of universal agreement. Can anyone else hear that? Because I can, man. It's like, oh, it's like this. When you know about what it is that they're doing on a psychological level, and I've trained in this outside of what I do for the Lord now. And before I was in the army, blocks of like social work and everything. This is my bread and butter. This and it ought to, in our own spirits, sort of like rear up against it, because it's contrary to everything that the Holy Spirit is in us. Being truthful, being honest, being open, having that as a sort of like, you know, a freedom almost, and how manipulative that this all really truly is. So, common manipulations to watch for. The exaggerated claims of public support. For example, everyone agrees. No. The media showcasing large crowds or polls of people which indicate a policy is favoured. Often the polls are fake. Marginalization of dissenters, a fringe, or that they're unpopular, and social pressure to align with the majority view. And we're doing all of this, guys, because some of y'all are going to go near these digital IDs. Telling you right now, and some of y'all are being vaxxed and jabbed. Some of y'all say one thing and you do another thing. I'm telling you, this is why we're coming out with this. Do not go with that crowd. Do not follow the rest of the sheeple. Stand up for the Lord. Stand up for your freedoms and what you believe in. Don't allow them to gaslight you, to roll over and manipulate you. And do you know what I mean? Dictate to you how it is that you should live. You answer to God and no one else. That's why it's really important to understand the tactics that are being used against you. Because unless you know what these tactics are, you're going to get deceived. You're going to be fooled. And you're going to end up in that cul-de-sac with nowhere to turn and nowhere to get out. You know, this is why we're doing it. So the scarcity of manipulation, the definition and mechanism Scarcity manipulation creates the perception that resources, opportunities, or times are limited, prompting urgent action to secure them. You know what I mean? Governments use this to drive compliance by exploiting the fear of loss and the psychological bias towards valuing scarce items. Unlike FOMO, which focuses on social exclusion, scarcity emphasizes the limited access to tangible or intangible resources. So how does that work? Well, it highlights limited availability, for example, times, goods, and benefits, to create that sense of urgency. It also triggers loss aversion, making people act to avoid that they're missing out, often paired with deadlines or rationing to amplify the pressure. The examples of these types of manipulations, well, the USSR's breadlines in the 70s and 80s. The Soviet government controlled food distribution, creating artificial scarcity to pressure citizens into compliance with state policies to access rations. Talking about this is like communist, sort of like Russia. This is what's happening now in the UK. It's what's happening all around the world. These are the tactics, guys, with their policies. These are their theoretical underpinnings. It's so important that we cover this. Cannot tell you how important this is. All right. Long queues and limited supplies were publicized to emphasize dependence on the state, pushing loyalty to secure necessities. Here, the vaccine rollouts to global COVID-19 2021. Governments announced limited vaccine supplies with phrases like book now, slots are filling fast, creating urgency to get vaccinated before doses run out. Press releases and book systems highlighted limited appointments, prompting quick registration. Number 3, the war bond campaigns in the US World War II 40s. The US framed war bonds as a limited time opportunity to support the war effort, urging citizens to buy before campaigns ended. Posters with deadline, etc. Buy now, support our troops, created urgency to invest. What were the common manipulations to watch for? Well, the announcement of limited resources or time-sensitive opportunities. Messaging like act now or lose out. Artificial shortages to drive demand. Prioritizing certain groups to create competition. So, the framing and narrative control. The definition and mechanism is this. Framing involves presenting information in a way that shapes how people perceive it, emphasizing certain aspects while downplaying others. Governments use this to craft stories that align with their goals, manipulating emotions and priorities to gain support. This tactic exploits cognitive biases like selective attention, where people focus on the framed perspective. So, how does it work? Well, selectively highlighting facts or emotions to shape interpretation, uses loaded language or imagery to evoke specific responses, and suppresses alternative narratives to maintain a single truth. Don't we just see that on our platform every day? Examples and types of this manipulation. Well, the US war on terror post 9/11. The US framed military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan as fighting terrorism to protect freedom, downplaying civilian casualties or geopolitical motives. And what happens afterwards with the big reveal? Yeah, no weapons of mass destruction. And oh yeah, we're going to leave you billions and billions and billions of military kit for you behind. Yeah, help yourself. Speeches and media use terms like axis of evil and images of 9/11 to justify invasions, overshadowing debates about oil, imperialism, and breaking of international law. The Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel's response to October the 7th is framed repeatedly as self-defense rather than any aggression, ignoring international law and decades of historical context for the region. State media emphasizes Palestinian threats while censoring reports of Israeli war crimes shaping public support. You will see frequent headlines that frame the deaths on both sides as Israelis being murdered while Palestinians just die, and vice versa. Climate change campaigns. Government framed environmental policies as saving the planet, focusing on catastrophic imagery to gain support while downplaying economic costs and trade-offs. If you've not seen the sort of like memes where they've got the temperatures from 2017 to like currently, and they're lower, but they're you know, put in red to evoke this fear. Ads with melting ice caps or suffering animals push urgency, sidelining discussions of policy feasibility and whether solutions are even planet friendly. Common manipulations to watch for. Emotionally charged language, for example, crisis or freedom. Selective use of facts or statistics to support a narrative. Visuals that evoke specific emotions, for example, fear or hope. Atrocity propaganda. Censorship or dismissal of alternative viewpoints. So, the guilt and moral shaming. The definition and mechanism is this. Guilt and moral shaming manipulate by making individuals feel morally responsible or inferior for not complying with a desired behavior. Governments use this to align personal values with state goals, exploiting the human desire to be seen as good or avoid social judgment. So how does it work? Well, it frames non-compliance as selfish, harmful, or immoral, just like they've done with the, you know, online safety bill, and likening those that are in opposition to that to be, you know, paedophiles like Jimmy Savile. Inconceivable. Yeah, how it works. It appeals to collective responsibility or societal values. Often uses public campaigns to amplify shame. Examples and the types of manipulation, well, UK World War II rationing campaigns. The UK government shamed those who violated rationing rules as unpatriotic or selfish, implying they harmed soldiers and civilians. Posters with slogans like, "Don't waste food, soldiers need it," made non-compliance feel like betrayal. The anti-smoking campaigns. Various countries used graphic ads showing smokers harming their families. For example, children exposed to secondhand smoke to guilt individuals into quitting. Images of sick children with captions like, your smoking hurts others, tied personal behavior to moral failure. And they've still got it on the fag packets now, haven't they? It's awful. This is like, really, you've got a Depop agenda. Why aren't you handing it out for free? I don't know. Right? The COVID-19 compliance. Governments shamed non-mask wearers or lockdown violators, that's right, okay, as endangering others. Well, there was no one else doing it, so I don't know how that was the case, right? Framing compliance as a moral duty. Moving on. Campaigners like, "Don't kill your grandma," or "You're just not risking yourself," made defiance seem selfish and even life-ending. There was one of the best sort of like videos I just saw of like all of these women in this like little shop, okay, and this woman just walked in without a mask, and everyone was like, oh, like this, and she just walked and goes and just walked out, and it was just like, Do you know what I mean? And really, those people now that are probably thinking, why was I so fearful? Why was I so whatever? But that woman just walking in was just like literally saying, will you just get a life? Do you know what I mean? It's just like that. I just love that clip, so I had to share it. Like the common manipulations to watch for. Well, messaging that ties non-compliance to harming others. It's what they guilt tripped the older generation into. Public shaming of individuals or groups. For example, naming the violators, the anti-vaxxers, those that do the real science, you mean, and ask questions, you know, us, yeah. Appeals to moral or communal values, example, do your part. The emotional imagery linking behavior to negative outcomes. And the FOMO is the fear of missing out. Definition and mechanism. The fear of missing out, or FOMO, is a psychological manipulation tactic that exploits the human desire to belong and avoid exclusion from social, economic, or cultural opportunities. Do not follow the crowd, man. Seriously. Don't be a lemming there now. It leverages anxiety about missing out on rewards, status, or trends to drive compliance or participation. Governments use the fear of missing out to create urgency or social pressure, often framing compliance is necessary to stay part of the in group or avoid being left behind. How it works? Well, it triggers social comparison and fear of exclusion, often paired with time-sensitive messaging or appeals to collective identity. It is amplified through the media, influencers, or public campaigns to create a sense of widespread participation. Well, the examples and types of manipulation are these: the vaccine campaign's global rollout. Governments and health authorities used the fear of missing out to boost vaccine uptake. It was harassing and bullying us. So I got loads from the school, loads from the doctor, and loads just randomly through, telling me, oh, you best get your jab, oh, you best get this, or that. And I'm like, no, jog on. I'm not touching that. This is just a manipulation of it. And it was all worded very much like that. No, messaging like, don't miss your chance to get back to normal, or join the millions being vaccinated. It's like, really? Are you going to sort of like, walk off the edge, and just go straight to hell because everybody else is? It's just like that. It really is. Implying that refusing the vaccine meant exclusion from social reopenings, travel, or community approval. Social media campaigns showcasing celebrities or peers getting vaccinated, paired with phrases like "be part of the solution" or "don't be left out," or evilly from the the Catholics, "oh, Jesus would be jabbed," coupled with restrictions on unvaccinated individuals. For example, vaccine passports for events reinforce the fear of missing social freedoms. The consumer incentives, the green growth policies. South Korea promoted eco-friendly behaviors by offering rewards, for example, discounts on public transport, to citizens adopting green technologies. Campaigns framed early adopters as trend setters, implying others would miss out on being part of a progressive movement. One to miss. Advertisements highlighted early adopter benefits or social prestige for using electric vehicles or recycling programs, creating urgency to join the trend. Danny doesn't recycle. Abbott's not ashamed of that. Moving on. Nationalism and military recruitment in World War I, 1917. The US used posters like "I want you" with Uncle Sam to evoke the fear of missing out, suggesting that not enlisting meant missing out on patriotic glory or letting down the nation. Slogans like "your country needs you now" or images of happy, heroic soldiers contrasted with implied shame from non-participants. That's why so many in the World War I and World War II ended up taking their lives, because they weren't, for one reason or another, able to enlist. And they didn't want to be given, white feathers and all that sort of stuff and be called cowards. So they decided to take their own lives. Awful. That White Feathers movies is brilliant. Anyway, the common manipulations to watch for: time-limited offers, for example, act now or lose benefits. You see this type of messaging in a lot of marketing and advertising too. The peer pressure tactics, everybody's doing it. Framing non-compliance as social isolation, exclusion from events or opportunities. Highlighting rewards only available to participants. So let's recap on what the above 6 manipulation tactics do before we move on to the next 6. Now that's quite a good effort. That, I mean, if you were to go over to the beast, and you go over to him and his playbook, this is literally it written out. How to control people, how to lie to them, deceive them. This is it. This is like going into the enemy's camp and sort of stealing his Enigma machine. All right. I hope you're enjoying this, all 12 of you. Here we go. Look, number 1, gaslighting. Let's do a recap. Gaslighting undermines confidence in reality, fostering dependence on authority. It overlaps with cognitive overload by creating confusion, but emphasizes reality denial, eroding trust and mental autonomy. Number 2, bandwagon effect exploits the desire for conformity, similar to fear of missing out, but less fear-driven. It overlaps with emotional priming by leveraging group dynamics, stifling independent thought. Scarcity manipulation plays on loss aversion, overlapping with the fear of missing out, but focusing on resources. It overlaps with carrot and stick by using resource-based incentives, creating panic or inequity. Framing shapes perception through selective storytelling, amplifying desired emotions. It overlaps with emotional priming by using narrative to evoke feelings, distorting truth, and limiting informed choice. The guilt and moral shaming leverage moral identity, aligning personal values with state goals. It overlaps with the fear of missing out by exploiting social pressures, alienating or polarizing groups. The fear of missing out exploits fear of social exclusion, pressurizing conformity to avoid isolation. It overlaps with bandwagon effect, but it is more fear-driven, undermining autonomy by fostering anxiety. Awareness tips. I love this. I love the sort of caveats. All right. To recognize the above manipulations, look for contradictions between official narratives and evidence, gaslighting, exaggerated claims of majority support, bandwagoning, artificial urgency or limited access, scarcity, biased language or selective facts, framing, appeals to morality that vilify non-compliance, guilt, claims of social exclusion or missed opportunity, fear of missing out. Now, let's move on to the next 6 key psychological manipulation strategies, and I will again provide a clear definition, explanation of their psychological mechanisms, and concrete examples of how governments have and are using them. The carrot and stick. Definition and mechanism. The carrot and stick approach combines rewards, that's the carrot, for compliance with punishments, that's the stick, for non-compliance to shape behavior. This dual strategy manipulates by appealing to self-interest, gaining the benefits, and fear of consequences, avoiding the penalties. Governments use this to enforce policies while maintaining the illusion of choice. Aren't we seeing that a lot, aren't we? How it works? Well, the carrot offers tangible or intangible rewards, for example, financial incentives, social approval to encourage desired behavior. The stick, it's like that moment in Friends when you you get sort of Chandler trying to go popan. It's like, dude, you can't even do that. Anyway, there you go. The stick imposes penalties, for example, the fines, the restrictions, the withdrawal of services, social stigma to deter non-compliance. Balances positive reinforcement with coercive pressure for maximum effect. The examples and types of the manipulation, well, here you go, still ongoing, the social credit system. Citizens with high social credit scores receive rewards like better loan rates, priority school admissions, or travel perks, that's the carrot, while low scores lead to punishment like travel bans, job restrictions, or public shaming. That's the stick. And this is what we're going to be having, guys. You know, what people are going to be having in the trip. Can't buy, you can't sell, you can't do nothing. Welcome to the carrot and stick. Some states have public leaderboards displaying high scorers to incentivize compliance, alongside warnings of consequences like restricted access to servers for low scores. That's where I would be. I would be like way down on the I wouldn't even be on their list. Do you know what I mean? Danny Trendell, nil point. I'd be so proud. You know, I'll be like, I'll leave it there. Tax compliant campaigns. All right. Some states' taxation offices offer deductions or simplified filing for compliant taxpayers. There's your carrot. While threatening audits, fines, or jails for tax evasions. Some countries have run ads emphasizing get your refund faster for early filers, contrasted with warnings of penalties for late lodgement or public naming of tax dodgers. The wartime rationing in the UK, World War II 40s. The UK government rewarded citizens who adhered to rationing with praise for patriotism and community spirit. There's the carrot. While penalizing black market traders with fines or imprisonment. There's the stick. They were posters glorifying do your part for the war effort, alongside public shaming or legal action for those caught hoarding or trading illegally. Some of the common manipulations to be watching out for: the financial incentives. Yeah, for example, the subsidies, the tax breaks, paired with fines or legal consequences. See what they're doing at the moment? You've got like 86 million people that have just lost their bank accounts because they don't want to have the digital ID. Look what they've just done in Thailand as well, with millions of those being shut down. You're not seeing the carrot and the stick here, guys. Can't help you. Social rewards, for example, public recognition, contrasted with social penalties, for example, shaming. Policies framed as voluntary, really, but with heavy penalties for non-participation. What did we just say? Graduated systems were rewards decrease and punishments increase over time for non-compliance. Here you go. Othering. What's the definition and mechanism for othering, you might ask? Well, othering is the process of creating an us versus them, divided by portraying a group as different, inferior, or threatening to justify discrimination, exclusion, or aggression. Governments use othering to unify their population against a perceived enemy, deflecting criticism and rallying support for policies. So how does it work? Well, dehumanizes or stereotypes a group to make them seem less relatable or deserving of empathy. It amplifies fear, mistrust, or moral superiority to justify actions against the other, often paired with propaganda to reinforce divisions. Examples and types of manipulation: the Israel-Palestine conflict. Western governments and media have frequently portrayed all Palestinians as terrorists or militants, framing them as threats to Israel's security to justify military aids and policies like food blockades, while ignoring decades of history of Israeli subjugation of indigenous Palestinians. And vice versa, might I add. Palestinians, this dehumanization unifies Western audiences against Palestinians or against the Israelis, deflecting scrutiny of disproportionate forces or force being used. News reports and political statements use terms like Hamas operatives instead of civilians for casualties, alongside selective imagery to emphasize danger only for Israelis, fostering fear and reducing empathy for Palestinian suffering and vice versa. Just so you know, I'm on Israel's side. All right. Red Scare and anti-communism. Here you go. The US government portrayed communists as un-American traitors plotting to destroy democracy, leading to blacklisting and public suspicion of left-leaning individuals. House Un-American Activities Committee hearings and films like I Was a Communist for the FBI framed communists as infiltrators, encouraging citizens to report suspicious neighbors. Anti-immigrant rhetoric. Governments in multiple nations, including the UK, have used othering to depict immigrants as criminals and cultural threats to justify border policies or deportations. For example, Hungary's Viktor Orban labelled migrants as invaders to rally nationalist support. The same is true across many Western nations. Political speeches or social media posts accuse immigrants as threats to job or safety and are contrasted with idealized depiction of native citizens. Okay. This is a very balanced thing, all right? I don't agree with all of some of this stuff. I know where I stand in my worldview, and I know whose side I'm on. All right, but I do appreciate a balanced argument. I do appreciate actually having two sides of that discussion. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but I'm not also going to add to that and silence it accordingly, because we have enough silencing of what's going on. So if people want to disagree with me here, that's fine. Keep it clean, keep the gloves on. Got no problem with that. Knock yourself out, literally. It's important that we have this, I think, because it's all getting steered away. So what are some of the common manipulations to watch out for? Stereotyping language, for example, labeling groups as dangerous or inferior. The visual propaganda, for example, images exaggerating differences or threats. Scapegoating, to deflect blame, for example, blaming minorities for economic woes. Policies that institutionalize exclusion, for example, segregation, travel bans, and loss of fundamental human rights. Here we go, the cognitive overload. What's the cognitive overload and definition and mechanism? Glad you asked. Cognitive overload involves overwhelming individuals with excessive information, complexity, or contradictory messaging to reduce their ability to critically analyze or resist. Governments use this to confuse or fatigue people, making them more likely to defer to authority or accept simplified narratives. It exploits the brain's limited capacity to process information under stress. How it works? Well, it floods people with data, rules, or conflicting reports to create confusion. It encourages reliance on unofficial official guidance to navigate complexity. It often is used in crisis to limit scrutiny of policies. So some of the types of and examples of this manipulation: the Brexit referendum. Both sides of the campaign bombarded voters with complex economic projections, trade statistics, and legal arguments, leaving many overwhelmed and reliant on slogans like "Take back control to decide." Overly technical reports and contradictory claims, for example, about the EU costs, confuse the voters, pushing them towards emotional or simplified choices. The COVID policy rollout. Governments issued frequent, complex, and changing guidelines. For example, mask rules, travel bans, vaccine schedules. Overwhelming citizens who then relied on official summaries or compliance to cope. Rapidly shifting rules and dense scientific briefings led people to follow just do what they say guidance. The Soviet bureaucracy of the 70s and 80s. The Soviet government used convoluted bureaucratic processes for accessing services, overwhelming citizens and discouraging dissent by making compliance the path of least resistance. Endless forms and vague regulations force reliance on state intermediaries. Common manipulations to watch out for: rapidly changing or overly complex rules, the flood of data or contradictory messaging, simplified official solutions to cut through confusion, normal things requiring excessive documentation or steps so that you can succumb to the new policy or strategy that the state wishes you to adopt. Hope you're still with us, guys. The authority bias exploitation. Definition and mechanism of that is the authority bias exploitation leverages people's tendency to trust and obey figures of authority, for example, the experts, without questioning. Governments use this to promote policies by associating them with credible figures or institutions, bypassing critical scrutiny. Just like Fauci was saying, oh, you're challenging me, you're challenging science. It's like, really? It exploits the human inclination to defer to perceived expertise or power, not being able to have that mind of your own. God gave us that mind to use. No doubt it's working overtime with this article, but rightly so. So how does that work? Well, it uses trusted figures, for example, scientists, leaders, and increasingly social media influencers to endorse the policies. It emphasizes credentials or official titles to suppress doubt, often suppresses dissenting experts to maintain a unified authoritative voice. So some of these examples and the types of those manipulations, well, here you go. Tobacco regulations. The US government used Surgeon General reports to push anti-smoking campaigns, leveraging medical authority to shift public behavior, even when some questioned the science initially. Official warnings from experts on cigarette packs carried more weight than individual skepticism. The climate policy endorsement that we're seeing still today. Governments cite scientists or organizations like the IPCC to justify environmental policies, framing dissenters as anti-science to discourage debates. Phrases like 97% of scientists agree were used to silence alternative views even when data was debated. That's because 97% was on the payroll. Some of the common manipulations to watch out for: heavy reliance on expert endorsements. We're seeing this now with AI overview, are we not? All right, people just turn into these things. The dismissal of dissent is unqualified or fringe. The use of official titles or institutions or influencers with large followings to legitimize policies. And the suppression of alternative expert voices. The emotional priming. Well, the definition and the mechanism of that is this. The emotional priming manipulates by evoking strong emotions, for example, hope, anger, disgust, and pride, to predispose people to accept a narrative or action. Governments use this to bypass rational analysis, making policies emotionally appealing. It exploits the human tendency to make decisions based on emotional states rather than logic. How it works? Well, it uses evocative imagery, stories, or rhetoric to trigger emotions, and very often the stories are untrue. It links policies to positive, for example, hope, or negative, anger. The emotional states often precedes policy announcements to prime acceptance. Some of the examples and types of this manipulation: the US post 9/11. The US used patriotic imagery, for example, flag waving and God bless America, to evoke pride and unity, priming support for the Patriot Act and Iraq War. Speeches and ads with emotional 9/11 imagery, for example, the firefighter victims, made intrusive policies feel like patriotic necessities. The atrocity propaganda in the first Gulf War, the US and Allied media amplified a fabricated story about Iraqi soldiers removing Kuwaiti babies from incubators, evoking outrage and compassion to prime public support for military intervention. The story later again was debunked and was spread by a PR campaign and a tearful, staged congressional testimony. Emotional imagery of infant deaths was widely broadcast and made war seem a moral necessity, bypassing scrutiny of geopolitical motives. The anti-drug campaign, the war on drugs, used fear-inducing ads, for example. This is your brain on drugs, to prime public support for harsh drug laws. And these are the ones that want to pump us full of it, just saying. Emotional imagery of addiction's devastation made punitive policies seem urgent. They've lost the war on drugs in that regard. Common manipulations to watch out for: evocative imagery or stories tied to new policies being enacted or tied to gaining agreement to war or other military campaigns. Speeches that stir emotion before policy announcements. It appeals to national pride, fear, or compassion. The emotional narratives overshadowing policy details. Desensitization. Definition and the mechanism of is this: desensitization involves gradually exposing people to controversial or extreme ideas, policies, or events to reduce the shock or resistance over time, aka the slow reveal. Grooming, priming, predictive, priming, programming. Governments use this to normalize actions that might initially provoke outrage. Desensitizing, for example, the exploiting the human tendency to adapt to repeated stimuli. So how does it work? Well, it introduces ideas or policies incrementally to avoid backlash. Uses repetition to make the unacceptable seem normal. Often paired with media saturation to dull emotional responses. Some of these examples and types of manipulation. Number one, the war on terror, drone strikes. The US gradually normalized drone warfare by starting with limited strikes and increasing their frequency, desensitizing the public to civilian casualties. Media reports framed strikes as precise, but are downplaying the collateral damage. The UK surveillance expansion. The UK has incrementally expanded surveillance through various laws legalizing mass data collection, such as the Investigatory Powers Act 2016, aka the Snoopers Charter, which expanded government's access to communications data, including internet browsing histories, facial recognition, and CCTV proliferation have further normalized constant monitoring. Media and government frame these as public safeties, and those measures reducing the public concern over privacy erosion, with campaigns emphasizing terrorism prevention to justify the intrusion. The UK national ID initiatives. The UK has repeatedly tried to introduce a national ID system, now a digital one, often tied to immigration control, to normalize pervasive identity tracking. Immigration fears have been leveraged to frame digital ID as a tool to combat illegal migration, desensitizing the public to privacy losses and centralized control. Media and government narratives such as securing borders or stopping illegal immigrants is in the process of normalizing digital ID checks, for example, via smartphone apps or biometric databases, downplaying the risks like data breaches or exclusion of vulnerable groups, for example, the elderly without tech access. Some of these common manipulations to look out for: the gradual escalation of controversial policies, repeated exposure to normalize extreme measures, the media framing that downplays the ethical concerns, incremental restrictions on freedom. So let's recap on what the above 6 manipulation tactics do before we move on to the next part of this article. Crikey, O'Reilly, I didn't realize this was this long. Woo! But this is all right now. I'm hoping that you're just sort of like, you're going to be able to box clever now with this. All right? So the carrot and stick uses rewards and punishments to enforce behavior, exploiting survival needs. It overlaps with scarcity, but focuses on direct control, coercing compliance and limiting choice. The othering portrays groups as threats to justify discrimination, fostering division. It overlaps with framing, but emphasizes dehumanization, eroding empathy, and enabling harm. Cognitive overload overwhelms with complex information, fostering reliance on authority. It overlaps with gaslighting, but focusing on exhaustion, impairing critical thinking. The authority bias leverages trust in experts to drive compliance, discouraging skepticism. It overlaps with framing, but emphasizes credibility, stifling independent judgment. The emotional priming evokes emotions to bias decisions, often using false narratives. It overlaps with framing, but focuses on arousal, distorting the rational choice. The desensitization normalizes extreme policies through gradual exposure, dulling resistance. It overlaps with framing, but emphasizes repetition, eroding moral awareness. To recognize these manipulations, look for rewards or penalties tied to behavior, carrot and stick. Well, if you have the mark of the beast, then you can eat, and you can say, you can trade, and you can buy. If you have the ID, you know what I mean, you can have a new job and a new rental sort of like thing gear and a new place to live in. Dehumanizing or threat-based language about groups, the othering. Confusing or excessive information, pushing deference, which is then the cognitive overload. The over-reliance on expert or leader endorsements, which is the authority bias. Emotionally charged, the unverified stories, the emotional priming. The gradual policy escalation or repeated normalization, the desensitization. Governments often combine several psychological manipulation tactics simultaneously to amplify their effects. For example, during COVID, authorities employed framing, we're all in this together, bandwagon effect, most people comply, guilt appeals, protect your community, the scarcity messaging, limited jab doses, the carrot and stick incentives. For example, free donuts for jab compliance versus job loss in the care sector for non-compliance. First, we're going to clap you and then we're going to sack you. These strategies were effective because they tapped into universal human traits: trust, conformity, loss aversion, and moral sensitivity. While this article has outlined 12 core psychological manipulation techniques, it's important to note that the list is not exhaustive. Tactics can overlap, evolve, or be content specific. Additional categories worth considering include distraction, diverting attention from controversial issues to obscure scrutiny. For example, amplifying celebrity scandals to overshadow policy failures. I'm really struggling to say that word. Reciprocity manipulation, offering small concessions to create a sense of obligation. For example, minor tax breaks to secure loyalty to unpopular regimes. False dichotomies, presenting issues as binary choices to limited debate. For example, you're either with us or you're against us. The Hegelian dialect, which is orchestrating a problem, reaction, and solution to steer outcomes. For example, exaggerating a security threat to justify surveillance laws or digital ID systems. These categories often intersect with the 12 core tactics discussed above. For instance, distraction aligns with framing, and reciprocity manipulation mirrors carrot and stick dynamics. It's really hard for a dyslexic man to come out with so much as this, man. Do you know what I mean? Ordinarily, I have to rehearse this or just try it out or get someone to speak it out for me. So apologies, my bad. I was already called stupid yesterday because I couldn't pronounce some really long word. Bear with me, all right? Nonetheless, the 12 identified tactics remain broadly applicable across most government manipulation contexts as they target foundational psychological vulnerabilities: the fear, the conformity, the trust, emotion, and cognitive capacity. Governments routinely blend the 12 tactics for maximum effect. During wartime, for example, they may combine emotional priming, the patriotic fervor, the othering, the enemy vilification, and authority bias, the military endorsements, to rally public support. Each tactic exploits specific human tendencies, making them highly adaptive across different scenarios. Repeated exposure to these psychological manipulation tactics can influence brain function and neural pathways over time. This occurs through neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and reorganize neural connections in response to experiences. This is because psychological manipulation targets cognitive, emotional, and social processes which engage specific brain regions. Repeated exposure can strengthen or weaken relevant neural pathways, alter emotional regulations, and influence decision making. And here's how this happens. The neuroplasticity and habit formation. The brain adapts to repeated stimuli by strengthening neural connections, the synaptic plasticity, in areas like the prefrontal cortex, which is your decision making, the amygdala, the emotions and fear, and the hippocampus part of your brain, which is the memory. Frequent exposure to manipulation reinforces specific thought patterns or behaviors, making them more automatic. For example, habitual compliance or fear responses. Over time, this can create neural pathways that favor certain reactions, reducing critical thinking and increasing susceptibility to further manipulation. Stress and the emotional impact. Well, many tactics, for example, the fear of missing out, othering, and gaslighting, activate the amygdala, triggering stress or fear responses. Chronic activation can lead to heightened anxiety or hypervigilance, reshaping neural circuits in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Prolonged stress can impair the prefrontal cortex ability to regulate emotions or make rational decisions, making individuals more malleable. This is what we're talking about, the weaponizing of technology in and around us. Yeah, we were saying with 5G and everything else, with the brain computer interfacing and everything. This is really, really important stuff. The social and reward system. Tactics like carrot and stick or bandwagon effect engage the brain's reward system. For example, the dopamine pathways, reinforcing behaviors tied to rewards or social approval. Repeated reinforcement strengthens these pathways, making people more likely to seek external validation or conform. Each psychological manipulation tactic engages different brain regions and processes, with long-term exposure potentially leading to distinct changes. Below, I outline the likely neural impacts of the same, linking back to the 12 identified categories of manipulation. The gaslighting, brain regions affected, the prefrontal cortex, which is the reality testing, the hippocampus, the memory, the amygdala, the anxiety. For mechanisms, well, the gaslighting creates cognitive dissonance, overloading the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus as individuals struggle to reconcile conflicting realities. Chronic exposure can weaken confidence in memory and perception. Long-term changes, well, reduced prefrontal cortex activity, impairing critical thinking and self-trust, heightened amygdala reactivity, increasing anxiety and dependence on external validation, disrupted hippocampal encoding, leading to fragmented or distorted memory recall. Whew. Telling you right now, man, this guy goes on and on. I'm going to call it a day here. I'm telling you. All right. I'm going to leave it right here. I think I'll read out the last bit of what he's got going on. All right. The good news. Wait for this. I'm not joking. This guy had as much as I just read out, and that's like an hour and a quarter. All right. And this is like really heavy stuff, but it's good to read about it. All right. The good news: recovery is possible. Not all psychological or neurological changes are permanent. Thanks to neuroplasticity, the brain can recover and rewire itself through new experiences such as education, therapy, and conscious reflection. However, prolonged exposure to manipulation tactics, especially within high stress or tightly controlled environments, for example, authoritarian regimes, can lead to lasting neural adaptations that reinforce compliance and diminish autonomy. This is why it's crucial to limit time spent engaging with devices or platforms that deliver news or events saturated, with the manipulation strategies discussed above. Reducing exposure helps preserve cognitive clarity, emotional resilience, and independent thought. Really interesting article there, guys. I'm really aware that is just like, and I'm still scrolling, man. It hasn't got to the top yet. All right. That's just a lot of information. Ordinarily, our brains can only cope with 45 minutes worth of intel, and then it sort of like just wanders off. My apologies for sort of like hitting you with another hour and 20 video, but I think it's really important, guys, that we have, information relating to the tyranny and the tactics that are being used against us. This is what the beast system is literally doing. This is what our leaders, this is what all of the marketing, all the adverts are literally sort of like having in and about that. We read in Isaiah 10:1, woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees and the writers who keep writing oppression, to turn aside the needy from justice and to rob the poor of my people of their rights, that widows may be their spoil and that they may make the fatherless their prey. Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Some really interesting sort of like things for us to be considering here, there, guys. I wouldn't be surprised if you guys haven't been having a huge conversation, because because there's not been a lot to really discuss with. Hi there, bless you for staying here, guys. Hi there, Sub-Zero, bless you, Alison, all of you, none but love. Hi, leave my rights alone. Good for you, love that. Yep, Sub-Zero saying it's all a psyop. Exactly. Yeah, you missed out on your free donut there. Can you imagine that, man? Seriously. Hi, Mian, bless you. Hi, Laura. Good to see you guys. Okay, how about we just leave that for a day, guys? I'm aware that I've really sort of like flogged the horse with you lot today, with you know, our mods as well, really working overload. It is a lot for them to be giving up in that time, but for me personally, you know, this is my kind of like bread and butter. All right, it is really important that we have the helmet of salvation. It's really important that we think and act and behave like the Lord, that we are separate away from all of these things, that we see the enemy's tactics and his techniques that he throws at us, how he incentivizes everything with the carrot and the stick, and all the manipulation and all the deviance, all the lying and all the stealing, and just everything that's shrouded in that blanket of filth and uncertainty. It's important that we understand the war that we are also waged in. It's important that we have some of these counter sort of like, you know, understandings and practicalities to be able to disperse some of those things, so that when these things come our way, we are able to be mindful of those and can so accordingly adjust. We don't go getting swamped. We don't start sort of taking on water or start falling apart when we're in this battle, we're in this warfare. But we can hold our ground firmly in the rock, and we can stand and push against the things that are being imposed against us, the things that they're forcing us, telling us that we must have, and how it is that we should be, and how they use all of these tactics to be weaponized against us. If you've got the time and if that's of interest to you, really is for me. I get a real kick out of how the brain works, how our personalities work, and how that affects our sort of like, you know, our cognition, our emotional area of volitioning, our spiritual and our physical, and how they all intertwine. I personally still find that really exciting. So forgive me, guys, if I sort of have to go there with all of this, but this is a really good read. You really want to be boxing clever, and you really want to have that mindset where you just know what the enemy is doing. Look at his techniques. This is all that we have literally done here, guys, today. We've gone over to the beast system, went to the enemy's tent, and we found his Enigma machine in this article and his sort of like rules of everything on how he does it, and we've stolen it. So if you guys want to have a read, I'll happily put that in the description box to our live. Okay, and I will put, which is all there ready in a moment, I'll put that up with some other videos pertaining to just reinforcing our live. Please also see the post this morning to read all about it. And if you're interested in what we covered before, talking around the digital ID, the Agenda 2030, as well as the mark of the beast, as well as the monstrosity of money given to Albert Bourla and Pfizer, please see that for yourself. Expect another post in about 10 minutes or so. And should we still be here tomorrow, whoo, see you then.